During its 15 years of serialization, Bleach reached the heights that not a lot of manga series managed to reach. Tite Kubo's approach for his mythological world of Soul Reapers and Hollows was so simple, yet so effective that even in the early days of its serialization, it was hard for people to ignore Bleach. From its initial concept and artwork to its characters and storyline, Bleach was unlike anything the audience of Shonen Jump had ever consumed. With this mini-series, I want to take a deep dive into how Bleach took inspiration from its predecessors, separated itself from its competition, and how it influenced so many modern-day manga series in different ways. In short, I want to talk about how Bleach changed everything. Back in 2001, Tite Kubo finished his first manga series, Zombie Powder, in the weekly Shonen Jump. This series went on for a year with 4 volumes and compiled a total of approximately 30 chapters. After the conclusion of Zombie Powder, Kubo had submitted the concept for a new manga, but unfortunately was scolded by Kazuhiko Torishima that his art was ugly and that he needed to become more consistent with his work like Dragon Ball or Fist of the North Star. However, after Kubo got his ideas rejected by the editorial department, he received an encouragement letter by Akira Toriyama himself. Toriyama told Kubo to keep working on his concept and story because he saw potential in the ideas. So after this, Kubo went back and worked more on the story, and in the same year, Kubo's own editor told him that he managed to get a place for him in the starting section of an issue of Akamaru Jump. This new manga was supposed to be called Snipe, and it was about Soul Reapers using guns to cleanse the corrupt souls of monsters called Hollows. However, Kubo wasn't very fond of this name, so first he renamed the series to White, but then he decided to submit it titled as Bleach instead, because he liked the association of the word with the black and white color scheme. Kubo had also made last-minute changes with the fashion and weaponry choice for the series, and submitted his work with Soul Reapers dressed in black kimonos and wielding swords. However, these last-minute changes didn't change anything in the marketing of the series. Bleach was promoted under its former name Snipe due to strict time management, but to my surprise, none of the readers back in the day had any problems figuring out that these two titles were part of the same story. Anyways, the main influence behind Bleach's concept and story was a manga called Saint Seiya, which was based on the Greek mythology of Olympian gods battling each other for the domination of Earth, while the artistic choices for the hollow creatures were influenced more by the designs of spirit monsters from Gegege no Kitaro. Kubo's approach for the overall story was highly dependent on his characters, which is why Bleach's opening chapters don't showcase the beginning to a grandiose goal, but instead opted to reflect the immense amount of potential and endless possibilities it had. In order to simplify what I'm trying to say here, we must first have a look at the premise of Bleach. Ichigo Kurosaki never asked for the ability to see ghosts. He was born with the gift. When his family is attacked by a hollow, a malevolent lost soul, Ichigo becomes a soul reaper, dedicating his life to protecting the innocent and helping the tortured spirits themselves find peace. What I found super interesting about the series was the amount of simplicity with which Kubo was able to use a supernatural setting within the story. The early chapters hardly go into the details of the boundaries of the world of the living and the dead, and are more focused on its main characters' designs, personalities, and relationships. I think how Bleach was separated very early from its competition was when Kubo pushed its world-building aspect in the background. This doesn't necessarily mean that the mythological world of Bleach was neglected in any way. It is true that the story of Bleach did expand when different elements of its setting were introduced, but it's the question of how they were introduced that's so important. For example, when Renji and Byakuya show up in Karakura town to take Rukia back to Soul Society, Ichigo is set up to be in the position to oppose them, but not by chance. This very specific moment is built up all the way from the opening chapters of the series. The only thing a lot of people are unable to notice at the first time of reading is that how Kubo has been pulling the strings of its otherworldly dimensions from behind the scenes, conveniently building up this confrontation for Ichigo's development. A few more examples from the early parts of the story include the encounter with Grand Fisher, the introduction of Ishida Uryu, and the introduction of Urahara Kisuke. Kubo himself has admitted that whenever he had to think about a new plotline for the story of Bleach, he would always first think about a new character. The reason I really like this is because he is making characters that would fit under a certain theme, situation, or personality that no one in the series would be able to do. The best example for this type of creativity is definitely Zangetsu. The swords used by the Soul Reapers, also known as Zanpakuto, are a small concept used in the world building of the story. Each Soul Reaper has a unique Zanpakuto name which they call out to and release two states known as Shikai and Bankai. While Zangetsu is introduced as a character because he obviously has a body, shape and a voice, it is still hard to ignore the fact that he is also introduced as a concept in the series. This is why I like to call Zangetsu a conceptual character. In order to simplify, what I mean here is that Zangetsu is the embodiment of Ichigo's soul. He is the one who gives Ichigo power, but at the same time he has a consciousness of his own, and it is important for Ichigo to build a strong relationship with him. Similarly, we also get a small glimpse of the Zanpakuto of other Soul Reapers. A few examples include Madarame Ikkaku, Zaraki Kenpachi, and Shinsui Kyoraku. Personally, I think that Kubo went for a more conceptual storytelling method and refused to write it in the basic format of what other series of Shonen Jump were doing at the time. He was building Bleach's end goal depending on its character's journey and not towards one. He wanted to slowly build the concepts he had introduced in the opening arc in a fulfilling manner. This is also why many people today think that Bleach was repeating the plotlines of its previous arcs and overlooked many themes of the story and refused to understand the motivation of its characters. The most obvious example is the comparison of Soul Society arc to the Arrancar Saga. First, let's analyze the overall plot and character motivations of Soul Society arc. At the end of the Agent of Shinigami arc, we are introduced to Kuchiki Byakuya and Abarai Renji. The two are in Karakura town to take Rukia back to Soul Society and punish her for breaking the law of transferring her Soul Reaper powers to a human. In the process, they also manage to defeat Ichigo and leave him to die before Urahara Kisuke finds him. This is when Ichigo's training arc begins with Urahara, so that he can save Rukia in Soul Society. Bleach's final few episodes of its first arc were already building towards the primary goal of its second arc, but it wasn't the only thing it was doing. It also introduced the world of Soul Society and the 13 Code Guard companies. Kubo didn't only introduce the world of Soul Society because he had to, it was because midway of the Agent of Shinigami arc, he had subtly hinted at the future plotlines of the story but didn't completely utilize them because the timing wasn't appropriate. Byakuya and Renji had a pre-developed relationship with Rukia and Kubo wanted that to become the central focus of the upcoming arc. But at the same time, he was still pulling the strings and building up a plotline for what was beyond the Soul Society arc. Things like Ichigo's mask at the end of his training, Ichimaru Gin's sinister personality, Byakuya's mentality to uphold the laws of Soul Society, and Urahara's mysterious past with the Soul Society. These are all plotlines which were explored in the upcoming arcs, but the more amazing thing was that even though he had hinted at these different storylines, Kubo still managed to not deviate from its primary goal of the Soul Society arc. I don't want to go into too much detail of the Soul Society arc, but let's have a look at the key moments of it which left a long-term impact on the story. Firstly, I want to analyze the relationship of Yoruichi and Soifon. The two characters have a long history, and Soifon is shown to hold a grudge against Yoruichi because long ago she aided a criminal and left Soul Society without her. Soifon isn't particularly mad at Yoruichi for betraying the Code Guards, but more because she never gave her a proper explanation for her actions and abandoned her. Soifon looked up to Yoruichi and was very loyal to her back when she was the part of the Code Guards, so it is pretty natural for her to oppose Yoruichi when she once again aids Ichigo in interrupting Rukia's execution. This storyline is very important addition because it gives importance to the major supporting characters, but also because it is still hinting towards the event that took before the first arc. Next up we have the relationship of Renji and Rukia. The two were close friends and joined the 13 Code Guard companies because they failed to protect their friends who they lived with in the Rokangai district. Their relationship takes a twist when Byakuya makes Rukia join the Kuchiki clan for his own personal reasons. Renji and Rukia were both well aware that Byakuya was the type of character who puts his ideals first and respects the laws of Soul Society more than anything, putting Rukia in the position where she had to live up to the expectations of Byakuya and the Kuchiki clan, and Renji in the position to surpass Byakuya and protect Rukia from the burdens that she was under. This particular storyline doesn't exactly support the concept of the series in any way, but it is important for the further development of the main characters of this arc. It is also important to grow a small amount of empathy for the characters. Now, there are plenty of other character relationships which can be analyzed, but to keep it short and concise, I am only going into the details of those that I personally think support Bleach's storytelling. So lastly, I want to talk about the relationship of Ichigo and Zangetsu and how it is the most important thing in the entire series, at least to me. Zangetsu is, like I mentioned previously, a conceptual character. His relationship with Ichigo is one of the few that is built from scratch from the first arc and is developed all the way till the last. One of the many things that I like about the series is that Ichigo is just as unaware of his abilities throughout the series as the audience. It is very important for Ichigo to understand Zangetsu's true motives and at the same time overcome psychological battles through his support. In the process, he also gets to know more about him directly through the main antagonist of the series, but that is something I will be analyzing in the next part. What I loved the most about the relationship between these two was the mystery element, because regardless of how many conversations they had, Zangetsu always had an unsettling vibe around him, almost as if he was hiding something great from Ichigo because he never wanted to manipulate his actions and wanted him to make his own decisions. Zangetsu's primary objective was to give Ichigo strength in his battles in different ways, and the one which particularly shook me was his battle with Byakuya at the climax of Soul Society arc. I don't want to spoil too much about this fight, but what I am about to mention just might spoil a small portion of it. The thing I'm getting into right now is the first time we witness Ichigo's holified form. This transformation happened in the middle of the fight against Byakuya and became one of the biggest turning points in the story. The holification of Ichigo happened without his will and surprisingly saved him from Byakuya's attack, which very well could have ended the fight. This transformation played a very significant role for the world building and concept of the story because it was built upon further in every major arc of the series and was slowly building up Ichigo's true potential for the final arc. Furthermore, Kubo brilliantly hid the fact that the Zangetsu we were introduced to was not the one who wielded this power, but someone else that coexisted with him inside Ichigo's spiritual world. Obviously, I'm talking about White Ichigo, the true source of Ichigo's hollow abilities. How Kubo managed to write the next section of the story is absolutely amazing. After building Ichigo and Zangetsu's relationship to a certain extent, he then shifted the audience focus to Ichigo's relationship with his holified form. He made Zangetsu step away for the majority of the next arc and gave control to White Ichigo in the spiritual world, almost making it seem like Zangetsu had allowed the hollow inside Ichigo to grow, when in reality both of them had the same view of Ichigo's development. I feel like the only reason he consistently brought Zangetsu back in the story was because Ichigo, for the majority of the series, had been rejecting his hollow form despite taking complete advantage of it in his battles. Kubo knew better than anyone else that the hollow side of Ichigo would have never been able to convince him to walk down a certain path. and it was best for Ichigo to defeat him and let the hollow powers gradually take over, making it seem like Ichigo rejected him as a part of his soul, when in reality, every step he took to control that power only resulted in the two growing closer. Now this is the point where I want to show how Kubo wrote the Arrancar Saga differently. When I went to the details of the characters' relationships in the Soul Society arc, those were basically to show how different the relationship of Arrancar Saga were from it. The arc following Soul Society is probably the longest of the series, and very rightfully so. There were two new groups added into this arc. The first one are the Espadas from Hueco Mundo, and the second is the group of Vizards who already reside within Karakura town. I want to put more focus on the Espadas first because I think it is much more important to analyze their characters to make a comparison with the 13 Code Guards. What I personally like about the Espadas is that the focus of their themes perfectly aligned with their personalities. Characters like Ulquiorra, Grimmjow, Stark and Haribel brought their own different charms and wit to the story. Kubo didn't give all of them backstories, which was not because he was running out of ideas to make them up, but because he wanted the dialogues to have weight to them. Ulquiorra and Grimmjow are easily the most popular ones from this group, so let's do a fair analysis of how both of them were written. On one hand, Ulquiorra became the fan favorite character because of his nihilistic personality. The idea of him rejecting the purpose of the existence of human emotions can be clearly seen in his actions. His power and words reflect his inhumanly dark personality. One of his most famous quotes is, "If it is because of what you call the heart, then it is that heart that causes you humans pain. It is because of that heart that you will die." And he further proves it by beating Ichigo to a pulp, showing that regardless of how much he tried, he would never succeed against him. Ulquiorra wasn't having a backstory, and this is what separates him from the rest of the Espadas. His nihilistic personality was explored to his highest potential because he was the embodiment of the despair and helplessness that Ichigo was supposed to overcome with his relationship with Zangetsu. On the other hand, we have Grimmjow, and what I like about him is that Kubo never wrote his backstory for character empathy. It was more to give context to his personality in the way where the audience wouldn't pity or feel sorry for him. If Kubo had done it in the other way, then it would have completely brought Grimmjow's character in a different light, and the results would have been extremely divisive. Kubo wrote Grimmjow under the theme of destruction by giving him a violent personality and short temper. His beliefs were just as strong as Ulquiorra's, but his initial view of looking down on everyone else and proving that he is the strongest is the great difference. He is shown to have been in Ajuha's class Menos in the past, and in his backstory he was shown to be the leader of the group of hollows of the same level. The primary goal of this group was to ascend into Vastolords. However, after many trials and tribulations, they still could not manage to evolve. This is when the group unanimously agrees over that Grimmjow should consume the powers of every single one of them because they believed that he was the only one in the group with the potential of evolving. One of his famous quotes sum up his character. It says, "They're all cowards, every damn one of them. Whatever. I will consume them. As they become my flesh and blood, they will see beyond. I am the king." What I'm trying to show here is that Kubo wrote the Espadas in a more broken up way than the 13 Code Guard companies. You can even take the relationship of Nell and Noitora as an example for this too. The Espadas were much more of a loose faction compared to the Code Guards because of their consistent gripes with other members. That doesn't mean that the Code Guards didn't have characters that were complete dickheads to each other, but they had the disciplinary figure of Yamamoto who kept everyone in order. It is also super interesting that even though Kubo has started the Hueco Mundo arc with a similar fashion as Soul Society, he managed to divert the focus to the previous plotlines he had introduced. And I think this was necessary because if he had waited any longer to make the reveals and didn't further expand on the concepts, then it would have resulted in him milking the crap out of the story. Next up, I want to talk about the Vizards. This group is shown to have an ability that Ichigo also has, the Holified transformations. What I found really neat is again the power system that Kubo explored. With the addition of the Vizard, Kubo managed to explore many different ideas simultaneously. Questions of Ichigo's untapped potential, which he unlocked by building a strong relationship with Zangetsu, the primary objective of Vizards, and how they would fit into the overall story. It's these little things which were answered slowly throughout the entire arc, leaving behind very few things unanswered, which build up to some of the best reveals in the final arc. It is these two things which blend together to make the Arrancar Saga so unique in comparison to Soul Society. It switches out the primary objective to the background and brings light to the world building aspect more through introducing new characters. However, with that being said, the next arc of Bleach is something that divided many fans. The Fullbring arc is more of a character-driven part of the story in comparison to the previous three. The reason behind this is that now Ichigo is completely stripped away of his powers. It explores his mindset and pushes him to his limits, and Kubo implemented this idea by focusing on one word: disempowerment. I for one have never seen a shonen series take risk as massive as the one Bleach did in this arc. Where every shonen series is about constantly leveling up and becoming stronger to defeat the bad guys, Bleach did the exact opposite. It feels very uncomfortable and frustrating to see how helpless Ichigo becomes for the majority of this arc. The execution is not the most beloved faction in the series in general, but they played their role so brilliantly of building up the mystery and tension. Again, this is Kubo at his best because he is building up the reveals of the story. What the majority of the fans felt during this arc was oblivion. It is a state where one is not aware of his surroundings and is slowly trying to understand the purpose of many things simultaneously. I actually do believe that the state of oblivion was always something that existed in Bleach's story, but I think it's much more obvious at this stage because a fair deal of reveals that were made in the previous arc. A powerless protagonist is something not a lot of series explore, and I also think this is what gave Kubo an advantage. It genuinely feels unfair to compare Bleach at this point to anything else in the shonen demographic. This direction was a massive risk, but damn, the payoff was so satisfying that it's absolutely nuts. Ichigo was so brutally torn apart in this arc, and the way Kubo rebuilt his character is so immaculately done that it's just amazing. The 1000-year Blood War arc is something I don't really want to talk about since it has a lot of spoilers and also because it would completely ruin the entire purpose of this mini-series. But I will end the video on one of the many poems that Kubo wrote at the start of his books. I believe that the world is full of danger. I want to protect you from it, only because inside me is the same impulse as that danger.